It was a bright and clear morning in Los Angeles. The sun shone brightly over the sprawling city, its rays bouncing off the sleek glass skyscrapers that made up the skyline, casting shadows across the busy streets below. Nicole Monroe, a 35-year-old self-made tech billionaire, stood outside her private hangar at LAX, preparing for another whirlwind business trip. As the head of a multi-million-dollar tech company, her schedule was packed, and today's mission was to head to New York for a series of high-stakes meetings. Her tailored navy blue suit and perfectly polished gold watch gleamed under the morning sun, symbols of the success that had come from years of tireless work, sacrifice, and overcoming countless obstacles. Nicole's private jet, a state-of-the-art model she had designed herself, sat on the tarmac in front of her. It was a sleek, luxurious aircraft with all the bells and whistles, a symbol of her wealth and hard-won success. She began walking toward it, confident and composed, when she noticed a small group of crew members gathered nearby. They were talking amongst themselves but frequently glancing in her direction, their murmurs barely audible but enough to catch her attention. Leading them was Captain Greg Harris, a man whose posture was rigid and whose eyes seemed cold with skepticism. Nicole had encountered prejudice before, but she had learned how to face it head-on, and she wasn't about to let this be any different. "Good morning, Captain," Nicole said, her voice calm but firm. Captain Harris gave her a once-over, his eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed her. "Ma'am," he said, his tone oozing with fake politeness, "I believe there's been a mix-up. This aircraft is reserved for high-profile clients." Nicole paused, her gaze unwavering as she took in the captain's condescending tone. She knew exactly what he was implying. The moment she stepped onto the scene, his judgment had already been cast based solely on her appearance. She refused to let that define her. With a steady voice, she replied, "I am the high-profile client." For a brief moment, Captain Harris seemed taken aback, his expression faltering. Before he regained his composure, he smirked, his disbelief quickly turning into a dismissive sneer. "Right," he said, dragging out the word unnecessarily. "Let me double-check, ma'am. In the meantime, you can wait in the lounge." Nicole didn't flinch. She could feel the disdain in the air, but she was used to it. Instead of allowing the situation to escalate, she gestured to her assistant, Danielle, signaling that they should wait in the lounge. As they made their way inside, Nicole's mind raced. She was no stranger to discrimination, whether disguised as politeness or professionalism, but it never made it any easier to endure. This time, however, would be different. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. Inside the lounge, she sank into a plush leather chair, the luxurious surroundings doing little to calm the sting of the encounter. The crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting their soft glow over the room. But Nicole couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The marble floors beneath her feet were cold, yet her mind was on fire, plotting her next steps. She pulled out her phone and dialed her legal team, speaking in a measured tone as she detailed the incident and outlined a plan for immediate action. Meanwhile, Danielle stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the crew outside, where they were clearly enjoying their moment of perceived superiority. Their laughter and exaggerated gestures made it clear that they hadn't learned the lesson of respect. Daniel's hands balled into fists, and his frustration was palpable. He was ready to step in and confront them, but Nicole gave him a quiet nod, signaling that she had everything under control. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. When Captain Harris finally reappeared an hour later, he walked into the lounge with a smug expression plastered on his face. "Unfortunately, the jet's owner isn't available right now," he announced, his voice dripping with false regret. Nicole stood, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She faced him directly, her posture commanding attention. "We'll discuss this now," she said, her voice cool and controlled, not giving him a chance to continue. Without waiting for his response, she turned on her heel and headed toward the jet. Daniel followed close behind, his loyalty evident in his every step. Nicole's every movement was deliberate as she walked toward the jet. Her eyes never left Captain Harris as she approached the stairs leading up to the aircraft. She paused at the base of the steps and took a deep breath. Steadying herself, pulling out her ID, she presented it without hesitation, showing the captain and the crew her credentials with all the authority she had earned over the years. For a split second, the crew froze, their confident postures cracking. Captain Harris's face went pale as he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. "This is your jet?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nicole gave him a sharp nod. "Indeed," she replied, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "And as of right now, you and your team are dismissed." The stunt crew slowly began gathering their belongings, their earlier bravado replaced by the unmistakable color of shame. Nicole stood tall at the top of the jet stairs, her gaze never wavering as she watched them leave. She felt no joy in their humiliation, but she knew this was a necessary moment, a moment of justice. Once they had disappeared from sight, Nicole allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile, but she knew this was just the beginning. The morning air at LAX had begun to warm as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Nicole stood at the top of the jet stairs, watching the crew retreat from the aircraft with their heads down. The hum of the airport's busy atmosphere surrounded her. But in that moment, it was as if time had slowed. She was calm, collected, her resolve firm. The incident with Captain Harris and his crew was far from over. But Nicole knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to let this slip through the cracks. Once the last of the crew members had disappeared from sight, Nicole turned to Daniel, her assistant who had been by her side through it all. "Contact the PR team. I want a statement prepared for the press. This isn't just about me," she said, her voice unwavering. "We need to make this about a much larger issue." Nicole's mind was already racing, crafting her next steps. She knew the power of social media and the media at large. With the crew dismissed and her right to travel unchallenged, the time had come to expose the toxic undercurrent of prejudice that still ran rampant in the aviation industry and beyond. But it wasn't just about making a statement, it was about creating a movement. Her phone buzzed as Daniel quickly began his call to the PR team, and Nicole moved toward the hangar to finalize the details of her flight. But her thoughts kept returning to the bigger picture. She knew her wealth and success had given her a platform. But it wasn't enough just to correct a small injustice. This had to be about systemic change. She had always been a fighter. But now she had a cause. And with it, she would strike with purpose. By the time Nicole was seated in her jet, ready to depart for New York, the wheels of her plan were already in motion. The story of her encounter had begun to spread. Word of the incident had leaked to a few influential figures in the media, who were quick to amplify the narrative. Nicole's social media pages were flooded with messages of support, some from strangers, others from high-profile figures who shared her vision for a more inclusive future. Hashtags like #BreakingBarriers and #KnowHerName began trending, and the media picked up the story almost immediately. Back in the office, Nicole's legal team was already preparing their next move. The airline, which had remained silent until then, began to feel the heat. They issued a public apology, one that at first glance, seemed sincere, but Nicole saw right through it. It was full of corporate jargon, promises of better training, and vague statements about inclusivity, none of which satisfied her. A vague apology wouldn't fix this systemic issue. Nicole knew that action spoke louder than words. When Nicole's private plane touched down in New York later that day, she was met by an entirely different kind of energy. The press had been following her every move. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Nicole remained composed, her expression determined. She knew the importance of what she was about to do next. The following day, Nicole stood at the podium in front of a packed press room. The world was watching. She spoke with clarity, her voice resonating with authority as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about me," Nicole began, her words measured but firm. "This is about every person who's been overlooked, dismissed, or judged based on the color of their skin or their gender. This is a systemic issue, and it's time we confront it head on." Her words sent ripples through the room. The press, her supporters, and even her detractors were hanging on to every syllable. Nicole wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been marginalized and mistreated in ways big and small. Her initiative to launch Open Skies had already been set in motion. And it would be her way of ensuring that what happened to her would never happen to anyone else again. The Open Skies program would offer scholarships to aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring that anyone with the talent and drive to succeed in aviation could find a path to success, regardless of their financial or social standing. It would also mandate diversity training for all airline employees and offer mentorship opportunities for those looking to break into the industry. Nicole knew that true change required more than just words. It required structural reform. Nicole's message wasn't just a call for justice, it was a call to action. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. But with each passing day, more and more people rallied behind her vision. The media continued to cover the story, with major outlets reporting on her every move. Nicole's name was no longer just synonymous with business success, it had become a symbol of resilience, empowerment, and the fight for equality. 2 weeks had passed since Nicole Monroe's press conference, and the world was still buzzing with the aftermath. Her initiative, Open Skies, had caught the attention of thousands, and the response had been overwhelming. People from all walks of life were sending letters, emails, and social media posts expressing their support for her mission. But Nicole knew that the real work was just beginning. She had ignited a spark, and now it was time to fan it into a flame that would challenge the deeply ingrained prejudices in the aviation industry. Nicole sat in her office late one evening, reviewing the countless messages of support, many from former airline employees who were eager to be part of the change. The stories they shared about the subtle, and not so subtle, forms of discrimination they had faced throughout their careers only fueled Nicole's resolve. It was clear that her experience was not an isolated incident. Across the industry, people were being held back because of the color of their skin, their gender, or their socioeconomic status. But Nicole wasn't going to let this be just another sad story. She was determined to turn it into a movement. With each passing day, Nicole watched as Open Skies gained traction. Schools were reaching out, offering to partner with her to provide scholarships and mentorship for young students interested in aviation. Nicole's legal team was working tirelessly to ensure that the changes she had proposed would be implemented at a national level. She was ready to hold the industry accountable. But she also understood that true change required more than just legal reforms. It needed to come from within, from the people who worked in aviation. From the flight attendants to the pilots to the ground crew. That's why Nicole was working to create a training program that would teach not just diversity but empathy, how to recognize bias, how to challenge it, and how to create a culture where everyone was treated with respect. As for Captain Greg Harris and the crew who had humiliated her, their careers had come to a screeching halt. Public outrage over their behavior had led to their immediate termination. Nicole knew that the consequences were necessary, but she didn't take any joy in their downfall. Her focus was never about revenge. It was about setting a precedent that discrimination had real consequences, and that everyone, regardless of their background, deserved to be treated with dignity. The day Nicole boarded her private jet again, it was under completely different circumstances. Her jet was no longer just a symbol of her personal success, it had become a symbol of change, of breaking barriers, of challenging the status quo. This time, she wasn't flying alone. Her new crew, a diverse group of men and women from different ethnic backgrounds and walks of life, had been selected as part of her commitment to giving opportunities to those who had been overlooked in the past. As she sat back in her seat, gazing out of the window at the endless horizon, Nicole couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She had fought for a new world, one where everyone had a fair shot, and now she was watching it take flight. The flight attendants, the pilots, and the ground crew who worked together to make this journey happen all shared a common vision: equality. And with that shared vision, they were part of something much larger than themselves. They were part of a revolution, one that was changing the way the world looked at success and opportunity. As Nicole looked out the window, the sprawling city of New York slowly came into view. She had always been driven by ambition and success, but now she understood that her real purpose was to break down the barriers that had been holding others back. She wasn't just fighting for her own success, she was fighting for everyone who had been told that they couldn't succeed because of who they were. Nicole smiled as the jet began its descent toward the airport. She had a vision, and now it was becoming a reality. The path to true equality was long, but with every step, she was getting closer. And as she looked at the faces of her new crew, she knew they were, too, together. They were part of something far bigger than just a business venture. They were part of a movement that would change the world. Nicole's journey was far from over, but it was no longer just about fighting for herself. It was about creating a world where everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or background, could soar. And with that, she knew her work had just begun.